final new topics of the 2014-2015 season. My name is Catherine Wallstrom, and I'm an Associate Professor of Biochemistry and Chair of Natural Sciences here at New College. It's my honor to welcome John Lentini, a New College alumnus from the class of 1969, who has a long career in forensic science and investigative work, all of which began with his studies at New College. Before we begin, I would like to thank our new topics series sponsors, WEDU, PBS in Tampa, the Herald Tribune, the Courtyard Marriott Hotel, and Treviso's Restaurant. It's now my pleasure to introduce our very special speaker tonight, John Lentini. John began his career in forensic science with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in 1974. He joined the private sector in 1977, and for 28 years, he was the lead fire investigator for Applied Technical Services of Marietta, Georgia. He is one of a handful of people on the planet certified to conduct both fire scene investigations and fire debris analysis. He has personally conducted more than 2,000 fire scene inspections and has appeared as an expert witness on more than 200 occasions. Mr. Lentini is an active proponent of standards for fire and other forensic investigations, and he has made many presentations on the proper use of science in fire investigations. He was the chairman of the Innocence Project's Arson Review Committee and was the lead author of the Willis and Willingham Reviews about two people who were falsely accused of arson. He was invited to speak during the National Academy of Science hearing that resulted in the 2009 report called Strengthening Forensic Science in the United States, A Path Forward. John is a member of the National Fire Protection Association Technical Committee on Fire Investigations, which writes a guide for fire and explosion investigations. He served for 6 years as the chairman of the American Society for Testing and Materials Committee on Forensic Sciences. And his book, Scientific Protocols for Fire Investigation, published by CRC Press, is now in its second edition. John started his own company in 2006 and is now an independent consultant living in the Florida Keys doing business as Science Fire Analysis. So please join me in welcoming Mr. John Lentini.
Thank you very much. Everybody here, I'm sure, knows something about fire, from trash fires and campfires and brush fires. And I'm going to show you something now about a structure fire. Structure fires are different.
This chair is stuffed with plastic foam.
Turn the volume up.
It has the fuel potential of 50,000 candles and no mechanism to control the release. The steady heat of a cigarette accidentally dropped between the cushions can create a disaster. Initially, the burning cigarette creates a smoldering fire, which breaks down the foam stuffing into vaporous fuel. When there's enough heat and oxygen, it starts to flame. More heat produces more fuel, and the fire accelerates rapidly. Smoke and other products of the fire, including unburnt fuel, collect beneath the ceiling. Within 3 minutes, the temperature at the ceiling reaches 1,000 degrees, heating the contents of the entire room near the point of ignition. The carpet and other furnishings start to break down into vaporous fuels. Then, within seconds, in a process called flashover, everything in the room erupts into flame. No life survives flashover. After all the oxygen in the room is consumed, a pulsing backdraft sucks in air from the outside, depletes it in a surge of burning, then breathes in more. All this took place in less than 4 minutes and started with a smoldering cigarette.
So, if you're at home and you see a piece of furniture on fire, run away. Get your children out. This is not what you expect. You expect a campfire. And when I first got in this business, the rap was, heat rises. Everybody knows heat rises. Well, it only rises till it gets to the ceiling. But people didn't think about that. And they said, Heat rises and it spreads upward and outward, and if the floor is burned, then the fire must have had help. And by help, we mean gasoline or kerosene or something like that to bring the fire down. We now understand flashover reasonably well, and we understand that the floor being burned doesn't really mean anything. In fact, I've seen fires set with gasoline, fires set with matches just on a chair, and they look identical within 5 minutes. You can't tell the gasoline is there unless you've got a dog that can smell it or unless you get real lucky. A laboratory can detect the gasoline, but finding it is really a trick. So the thing that we really are struggling with now is not the fact that the floor burns, but when that flashover occurred, it used up all the oxygen in the room, and it changes the fire patterns in the room. In fact, when that happened, the chair probably went out. That chair probably stopped burning at that point because there was no oxygen back at the chair. You've got to have it all together. You have to have the whole fire triangle. So we try to do science in fire investigation, and in 2006, when I registered this name, I was surprised that nobody had registered it yet. So that's the name of my company. And since I've been in the business, we have changed considerably. We used to have a lot of art and not much science. And now we got science and hopefully not much art. This is from Michael Faraday. There is no more open door by which you can enter into the study of natural philosophy than by considering the physical phenomena of a candle. There is not a law under which any part of this universe is governed that does not come into play and is not touched upon in these phenomena. Michael Faraday first gave this talk at the Christmas lectures at the Royal Institute in 1848. People liked it so much they invited him back 12 years later. And he gave it again. This is a fun little book. This is what was known about fire back then, which was quite a bit. And Faraday explained it. This is what I say about it. I said, science can explain fire, but the fire is very complicated. It's a little shorter than Faraday's. In 2009, this book came out, and it shook up the forensic science world in a big way. Basically, this National Academy of Sciences group said, y'all are doing it wrong. If you're not doing DNA with statistics, you're not getting it right. And I think they went a little far. But this is what they said. They said that better connections must be established and promoted between experts in forensic science, disciplines and law schools, legal scholars, and practitioners. There's a lot of police science, forensic science, that had nothing to do with real science. It came out of fingerprints. There's no money to be made in fingerprints, and so there's not been a lot of grants on it. There's no money to be made in matching bullets to guns. There's no money to be made in a lot of the police sciences. There is money to be made in DNA and biochemistry, and so a lot of independent research got done. This is what we look for in fires. We look for the point of origin, and it's defined as the exact physical location within an area where a heat source and a fuel interact, resulting in a fire or explosion. The origin of the fire is one of the most important hypotheses that an investigator develops and tests during an investigation. It's a hypothesis. It's the most important one, and it is the core competency of fire investigators. If you can't figure out where the fire started, you're going to get the cause wrong. And yet, recent work that's been done indicates that fire investigators have a really hard time finding the correct origin of a fire. I'm going to give you a little bit of fire dynamics, and you saw that in the video. Fires behave differently inside structures. Heat rises, but only until it reaches the ceiling. And rule number 3, once a room becomes fully involved, accurate visual interpretation of post-fire artifacts becomes difficult, if not impossible. And yet, every single day, we've got people with almost no training in science, no education in science, training in fire investigations. They are interpreting these artifacts and determining the point of origin. They're making very sophisticated decisions about chemistry and physics, and the last chemistry and physics they had might have been in high school. Here's some recent trends. The numbers that the National Fire Protection Association collects, who knows how accurate they are because there's forms filled out at fires and people check off what they think caused the fire. But these are general trends. Cooking equipment, still responsible for 40% of the fires. 8% is intentional. Whether that's a good number or not, I don't know. There are some people that think 50% of all fires are intentional. I got a hard time with that. This is fires versus arsons nationwide. The green is the fires, the red is the arsons. And when you put it on a little bit tighter scale, this is what it looks like from 1999 to 2008. The guy in Texas did a study on wrongful convictions. We've got cases out of Texas where a guy was actually executed for lighting a fire that I believe was an accident. And he reported, this is Dave Mann from the Texas Observer, a 60% drop in the number of fires that are called incendiary by the fire investigators. But the number of fires has stayed the same. So he says if most of that 60% drop is accounted for by accidental fires that would have been ruled arsons, it's reasonable to assume that 30 to 50% of the people in prison on arson convictions are innocent. In Texas, that would add up to between 250 and 400 wrongly convicted people. I think this number is wildly inflated. There are some safeguards in our criminal justice system. Not a lot, but there's some in there to keep innocent people from being convicted. But if anybody believes that innocent till proved guilty thing you learned in high school civics, it's a fairy tale. Here's arsons versus fires in Texas. And here they are falling off from almost 20% down to 7% over a 10-year period. These are what people have called arsons. And Mr. Mann thinks that the area under the curve there represents wrongful convictions. Certainly some of that does, but I'd have a hard time believing all of it does. In Massachusetts, there's an even bigger disparity. The number of fires went up, the number of arsons, or fires called arson, went down. And this is what it looks like, going from over 20% down to under 2% in a 25-year period. Now, rather than saying this is due to people being more careful about calling fires arson, the fire marshal in Massachusetts said this is a result of effective law enforcement. And they have put all the arsonists in prison, and the ones they haven't put in prison, they go someplace else because they know that they're going to get caught. So somewhere between Mr. Mann and Mr. Cohen, the fire marshal in Massachusetts, lies the truth. So, talk about incompetence. If you have an incompetent plumber, you know it. Your pipes leak. An incompetent surgeon buries his patients. An incompetent harbor pilot is going to run his ship aground. But an incompetent fire investigator? How would anybody know? Now, one of the things that they teach you as a fire investigator is how to testify confidently. And if you can get up and be confident in front of a jury, they're going to believe you. And if you talk about uncertainty, they're going to hate you because they don't like uncertainty. But this is not only true of fire investigation, it's true of all forensic science. Any historical science, and all forensic sciences are historical because we're trying to figure out what happened in the past, how is anybody going to know? Unless there's a videotape, and then you don't have to have a trial. How is anybody going to know? So fire investigators get up and testify, and the jurors are just shaking their head because the guy's confident. This is incompetence. When you truly believe you can compensate for the lack of skill by doubling your efforts, there's no end to what you can't do. The essence of incompetence is that you don't know you're incompetent. You think you're competent. And this is what happens in a lot of different forensic science fields, but fire investigation is especially prone to it simply because we don't have educational requirements for fire investigators. The vast majority of fire investigators do not possess a bachelor's degree. Fewer than 10% possess any kind of science degree. So, it made it easy for me. I have a science degree from New College. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. All right, this is our NAS report that I talked about earlier, and this is an indictment of all forensic science with the exception of DNA. The simple reality is that the interpretation of forensic evidence is not always based on scientific studies to determine its validity. This is a serious problem, you think? Now, you don't always need statistics, and you don't always need, the heavy-duty DNA. This is a shoe print that was found at a crime scene. And this was the shoe that was taken off of the suspect. And it doesn't take a lot of science, a little bit of pattern recognition here. You'll never find statistical studies of shoes making footprints with screws in the bottom. And they never had to take this very far because they showed the footprint to the suspect. They showed him his shoe, and he said, all right, and he confessed. And this is how a lot of police work is done. But for the most part, we're trying to figure out things that are not quite that obvious. But there's no good evidence to indicate that the forensic science community has made a sufficient effort to address the bias issue. So it said this committee is one of these blue ribbon commissions. It's impossible for the committee to fully assess the magnitude of the problem. There were only 4 sentences in this 254-page report that were specific to fire, and I will claim credit for getting them put in there. It said much more research is needed on the natural variability of burn patterns and damage characteristics and how they are affected by the presence of various accelerants. Despite the paucity of research, some arson investigators continue to make determinations about whether or not a particular fire was set. However, according to testimony, that would be me, many of the rules of thumb that are typically used to indicate an accelerant was used, alligatoring, char patterns, there's all of these rules of thumb that I learned when I first got into this business. And they all mean that the fire was intentionally set. He said experiments should be designed to put arson investigation on a more solid scientific footing. I said, well, that's good. But I thought I'd heard that somewhere before. Uh-oh. And this is what they wrote. Although burn indicators are widely used to establish the causes of fires, they have received little or no scientific testing. So I'm thinking, this is the echo that I heard. A program of carefully planned experiments should be conducted to establish the reliability of currently used burn indicators. Very good. I read that in a U.S. Department of Justice arson investigation survey and assessment 40 years ago. So this is what happens when you get a blue ribbon panel that makes all these great recommendations. The 2009 report is getting some traction now in 2015. There's been some committees formed to address each of the forensic science areas. It's based out of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Who knows how it's going to work? It could just be that it's all window dressing, but at least it's window dressing. So in 2005, a friend of mine ran this origin accuracy experiment. These are 2 guys from the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They run a national training academy in Brunswick, Georgia. And they've been doing this exercise since the early 90s. They bring people in, and they show them a burned out structure, and they have them write down what they think happened in that structure. They don't put their names on it. And then they show them a videotape of how it worked. And over the years, about 10% got it right. So they took this out into the public at a fire investigation conference in 2005. They let this room burn for about 2 minutes after flashover. That's incredibly fast compared to how long fires burn if they start in an unoccupied house now. They asked 53 experienced fire investigators to examine the scene and indicate a quadrant, not a point, just which quadrant of the room did the fire start in. And most of them picked the upper right quadrant on this slide because right at the base of that wall there's this giant burn pattern. We call them BABP, big ass burn pattern. And these guys all went, and most of them thought that's where the fire started. The actual origin was in the upper left. And there was just a little V-shaped pattern on the wall there that they should have paid attention to. And they should have ignored this one, because this one was caused by ventilation. But they weren't thinking. 3 out of 53 got it right. 3 out of 53. Not one person determined the actual point of origin. That's less than chance. If you put a blind man in there and spun him around and told him to pick a quadrant, you put 53 blind men in there, 12 would get it right. They did a second one, and a different 3 investigators got the origin right. And then the word got out, and the spinning machine started, and people said, oh, well, maybe those guys weren't all experienced. Maybe they weren't qualified. And I said, okay, fine. Let's take that 53. Let's pretend that 23 of them weren't qualified. You still end up with 3. You can't fix the numerator. You still have 3. So maybe it's only a 90% error rate instead of a 95% error rate. So the test, this is your laboratory, by the way, the $120 million facility in Amandale, Maryland, the best fire research facility on the planet. So they went there, and these tests cost like about $50,000 a piece to run. Above this room here, there's a giant hood, and the hood allows all of the smoke to be gathered, and none of the smoke goes outside. And all the water that they use to extinguish the fire, none of that gets outside. State-of-the-art facility. So they went and they instrumented these rooms. They rebuilt them. They put thermocouples in. They put gas measurement in there, and tried to figure out what was happening. And they did. This is called Smoke View. This is a model program, a computer model program that can't tell you what happened, but if you know what happened, it can help you characterize the fire. There was 150 kilowatts per meter squared on the wall opposite the door. And to give you an idea, that flashover video you saw, that was probably 20 kilowatts per square meter that lit the rug on fire. If you walk outside on a sunny day, that's 1 kilowatt per square meter that the sun gives us. So this is a lot, and it's enough to cause a big burn pattern. That burn pattern. And they figured out what it was about. This modeling program allows you to actually predict the oxygen concentration, among other things. It'll tell you the temperature, it'll tell you the oxygen concentration, water, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. All of these things can come out of this model. And they hypothesized a floor jet. This is a plan view looking down. This is a slice looking at the side of it, and the red is where the oxygen is. Where there's blue, there's no oxygen in the room. So where's it going to burn? Where the oxygen is. And that's how that burn pattern got made. But there's a lot of fire investigators don't think about this. This is the reference. They replicated the experiment in 2007, and they changed it slightly. They vetted the people that were doing the examination slightly, or more actually. And they set 3 fires. One of them they put out right away. 30 seconds after flashover, they put the thing out. The next one went 70 seconds after flashover, and the third one went 3 minutes. All of these are wildly optimistic for the fire department getting and putting this thing out. They had 70 guys, and as in Las Vegas, they were asked to choose a quadrant, just a quadrant of origin. For the 30-second fire, 70 people responded. They got 84% correct. Not real great if you're going to send people to the penitentiary based on it, but, better than 3 out of 53. For the 70-second fire, there were 6 people who had the sense to say, I don't know. I'm not going to tell you where I think it started because I can't tell. 44 of 64 got it correct. We're down to 69% for a minute and 10 seconds after flashover. And for the 3-minute fire, there were 53. So 17 people said, I don't know. But 53 said, I can tell you where it was. And of them, 13 got it correct, 25%, which is exactly what you'd expect from chance. Two coin tosses, and you can pick the quadrant. So my conclusions about this is that absent a videotape of the event or a credible eyewitness, fire investigators should not be permitted to express opinions about the point of origin in a fully involved compartment. They just shouldn't be allowed to do it. They should have to look at everything. And the second thing is a failure to locate a competent ignition source at the hypothetical point of origin usually means the wrong point of origin has been identified. Now, what's wrong with this? They look at this area, they say, oh, my area of origin is right over here by this plant. And I don't see any accidental sources of ignition there. Therefore, it must be a set fire. It's called negative corpus thinking. It's police thinking. And it's also the kind of thinking that these guys say, I am such a clever fire investigator that if there were an accidental cause, I would surely find it. But if they have the origin wrong, they're going to come up with the wrong cause. Every potential ignition source in a fully involved compartment needs to be looked at. So if you take that whole room to flashover, everything has to be looked at, or you're likely to get it wrong. Now, obviously, this doesn't include scenes where there's credible evidence of causation, incendiary devices or accelerants, and I've seen probably 800 arson fires in my day. And, you know, sometimes you walk in the living room and the gasoline is squishing around your boots. That's a clue. I mean, you know, keep an open mind, but not so much that your brains fall out. You can find an identifiable ignition source or other persuasive evidence of cause. That's what we look for. So what's going on? It's fire dynamics. People have probably heard about the fire triangle. You need fuel, you need oxygen, you need heat. So this is a simplified chemical reaction. You've got the fuel at the bottom, you've got oxygen at the top. I've left out the nitrogen because it doesn't really participate much. And the little molecules of fuel come off as the fuel breaks down. It pyrolyzes. Big molecules turn into little molecules, and they turn into gaseous molecules. And fire only occurs in the gaseous state. So at this point, the oxygen molecules and the fuel molecules begin to react with each other, and you get carbon dioxide and water if you have a good, efficient flame. Or you get carbon monoxide if you don't have quite enough oxygen there. And eventually, you tie up all the oxygen, and it becomes harder and harder. So let's go back to Dr. Faraday's candle. One of his experiments involved putting a screen over the top of it. You get this nice round area. And what you're looking at, you got a light zone, you got a flame zone, fuel gas coming off of the volatilizing wax and oxygen coming in. So this is real simple. It's a nice laminar flame. It's not at all like you see in a fire scene. But this is what it looks like. You got the fuel on the inside, the oxygen on the outside, and you got the flame zone at the red line. And that's where your reaction takes place. You make carbon dioxide and water. And these are the phases of fire development. And as long as you can get that fire out before it flashes over, or within a minute or so of flashover, anybody could walk into that room and tell you where the fire started. It's after it flashes over that you have the problems. So here's some slides just showing basically what we saw in that video at the beginning. Fire becomes established, the fuel, the plume reaches up to the ceiling, and it draws in cool air at the bottom. The compartment begins to fill with smoke, and this is the tricky part that people don't get. That smoke layer is getting thicker and hotter. There's energy going into that smoke layer, and it's radiating heat every direction, including downward. So we've got fire going down, and this is so counterintuitive, and most jurors, until they get somebody like me explaining it to them, don't get it. The heat transfers to the walls, the smoke starts going outside, cool air comes in. Radiant heat raises all of the fuels to near their ignition temperatures. And we're talking about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit at the ceiling, or 500 to 600 degrees C. And the heat radiates downward. And then you get flashover, or total fire involvement. The temperatures can then go up to 2,200 degrees F, 1,200 C. gets really hot in there. It'll melt copper. Used to be people would say, oh, I see melted copper. This fire got too hot. Must have been accelerated. Turns out that an accelerated fire and a non-accelerated fire burn at exactly the same temperature. It's all about the oxygen. Flames extend out of the vent because that's where, once they get outside the room, there's plenty of oxygen. And so a lot of times you'll see black smoke coming out and then turning into flames. But you can superimpose that candle on this room just to get an idea what's happening. And the only place where you can have burning is down at the floor, because that's where the oxygen is coming in from the outside. All of your burning is going to be down in this green zone here. And it's going to create very confusing patterns for people that come in afterwards. This is new in 2013. A guy named Andy Cox from the ATF has proposed this as a means of thinking about fires. You can start a fire in any one of the quadrants. And if you put it out quick, it'll be easy to tell. Once you get to flashover, the whole room is full. And post-flashover, all the oxygen is gone except right around the door. So the only place you'll have any fire is right around the door. And then you can look at the damage afterwards, and that's all we've got to work with. We very seldom get videotapes. Videotapes are nice, but we very seldom get those. Because if they have videotapes, they don't need fire investigators. So flashover conditions, you'll still get more damage where the fire started. Short duration, you might still be able to see it. But a long duration post-flashover fire is going to be over on the right, and we know it started on the left. So Andy came up with this matrix, and he's got four different types, four different places where the fire started. Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2, Quadrant 3, and Quadrant 4. When you get done, long duration post-flashover, they all look alike. Damages generated during post-flashover compartment fires offer little insight, and yet those are the biggest damages, are the damages caused by the ventilation. So investigators have to figure out what's due to ventilation and then say, that's not the pattern I'm looking for. Damages that can't be attributed to post-flashover ventilation must be systematically evaluated in any credible origin analysis. So it's like you look at it and you say, that's the pattern I'm looking for. That's one that I cannot explain in terms of oxygen coming in the door or the window breaking and letting the oxygen come in. That's where you want to be looking. Back to the NAS report. They say the vast majority of opinions reported in criminal cases indicate that judges rarely exclude or restrict expert testimony offered by prosecutors. We've got a rule now, it's called the Daubert rule, where the judge has to say that this guy is credible, this guy's reliable. And in criminal cases, the prosecutor gets to say what he wants, regardless of how unreliable it may be. It's very different in civil cases where people are just fighting about money. Plaintiffs and defendants, they're likely to have better access to money and expert witnesses. And in a civil case, there's all kinds of people get excluded all the time. In fact, every civil case that I participate in now, somebody says, oh, Lentini should be excluded because he did this or he did that or he didn't do something right. It's a very common motion in civil trial practice. It's still not very common in criminal trial practice. Ironically, appellate courts are more willing to second-guess trial court judgments on the admissibility of purported scientific evidence in civil cases than in criminal cases. I wonder why that is. It's an appalling irony. Despite the beyond a reasonable doubt standard of proof imposed on the prosecution in criminal trials, in many jurisdictions, a defendant can be convicted, imprisoned, and sentenced to death on the basis of purportedly scientific opinion evidence from prosecution experts that could not remotely meet the standards required of such evidence in a civil trial. I have met dozens of people who can't tell you what a watt is, okay? And maybe the folks in the audience don't know that a watt is 1 joule per second. and that the joules are the basic units of energy. But by God, somebody that's making his living rendering opinions about the cause and origin of fires ought to know basic stuff about energy. And this is how it is, and I think it's because judges run for election, and they want to be seen as tough on crime. And so they're more than happy to be the gatekeeper in a civil case. But in a criminal case, oh, we don't want to be letting this guy off on a technicality. And so all kinds of really bad science gets into criminal arson trials. These are the real gatekeepers. Once these people have made up their mind that it's time to take somebody to trial, chances are he's going to go to trial. And the way we try cases, the science starts on day 7 or week 7 of the trial. And the worse the science is, the more non-science they'll put in. The first thing, a lot of times we have dead people. Sometimes we have dead children. And so the prosecutor says it's a monstrous act. So the state has to prove that the defendant is a monster. And by the time the science is addressed, the jury already hates the defendant. And that's exactly what the prosecutors want. They don't want to be messing around with no science. They don't understand it. The judge doesn't understand it. The jury doesn't understand it. It's similar to the problem facing forensic scientists, that when we look at evidence in a laboratory, we're supposed to be looking for the truth. Supposed to be. But this is what Clarence Darrow said about it. I'm afraid he was right. Courtroom is not the place where truth and innocence inevitably triumph. It's only an arena where contending lawyers fight not for justice, but to win. And by the time the lawyers have engaged in the trial, that's what they're doing. Except for the criminal defense lawyers. And this is something that people don't know about criminal defense lawyers. Most of the time, their clients are guilty as hell. And most of the time, they know it. And they don't particularly want that guy running around the street. But it's their job to get him a fair trial. So the control of information in all venues will aid in that search for truth by reducing bias. We can have sequential unmasking, where it's not necessary for the fire investigator who's determining where the fire started and how the fire started to know that the husband and wife had a knockdown, drag-out fight last night, or that the guy's 3 months behind on his mortgage. That's just not important. Somebody can know that. The jury can know that. We do the same thing in the laboratory. When DNA analysts get a case, they don't need to know that the guy's fingerprints were found at the crime scene. They just need to focus on the evidence. We can bifurcate in the courtroom. And this is something I've been advocating for years, and it's probably not likely to happen. In criminal trials, prove that the crime happened. I've had so many cases where there were accidental fires mislabeled as arsons. And sure, if it was really an arson, the defendant did it. But if it was an accident, nobody did it. This is one thing we could do. We could just say, unless the cause is stipulated, the state has a burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that the fire was incendiary before presenting evidence regarding the guilt or innocence of the defendant. Before you tell a jury what a terrible person the defendant is, prove your cause. Not going to happen. Short of that, could have an evidentiary hearing. And this is happening more and more, where the defendant moves to have the state's evidence excluded. There's a document called NFPA 921. NFPA is National Fire Protection Association. We write a book, and it's called Guide for Fire and Explosion Investigations. This is how you do it. And if somebody's interpretation of the post-fire artifacts is significantly different from those in 921, those opinions are properly excluded. Not likely to happen, but sometimes the prosecutor will drop the case if he sees that he's got a weak case. Not all prosecutors want to convict everybody all the time. Some of them only want to convict guilty people. The Texas Forensic Science Commission, which looked into the wrongful execution of Cameron Todd Willingham, said we should have these kind of hearings in all arson cases. And finally, you could ask the judge to just instruct the jury, before you consider guilt or innocence, decide whether this was an intentionally set fire. So this is my fan club. These are people that I have worked with or worked for over the last few years. The people with numbers behind their names, that's how many years they served in the penitentiary before they got out. The The people with stars are people that were actually convicted. The yellow people are people that I merely helped to beat their insurance company. And the people without, just in white, managed to avoid being convicted by getting acquitted. Let me tell you, getting acquitted, you're still broke. You are still broke. You are financially ruined. And the list goes on. There's about 50 people on the list now. Ernest Willis was on death row in Texas for 19 years before he was exonerated. And for the people that have been telling me, oh, I thought you were retired or semi-retired, these are the people I've been working for in the last 12 months. Michelle Black in Pennsylvania, James Hugney served 36 years, Han-Tak Lee served 25. The Rojos, they beat their insurance company just a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Rosario in Massachusetts served 23. Here's me and Mrs. Black. These are great parties. After the jury comes back and says not guilty, everybody goes out and celebrates. This is James Hugney, who got out after 36 years. This is Victor Rosario, who served 23 years in Massachusetts. And this is Han-Tak Lee and his lawyer, Peter Goldberger. Mr. Lee's the guy in the sport coat and tie. He served 25 years. I was working for him for 21 of those years. And that's a really long time. And the reason is we kept losing. Now, finally, we got an appeals court to read what the facts were in the case. My son was 10 years old when I took the case on. And he sent me this after Mr. Lee was finally released from prison, the Dead Windmill Award. So this is a good friend of mine, Dr. Jerry Hurst. He just died last week. He was one of the leaders of the chemistry profession. He worked for Atlas Explosives. He made bombs for most of his career. He invented the Mylar balloon, became independently wealthy, and then started looking at, somebody asked him if he would look as a chemist at a fire case, and he looked at it, and he said, this is terrible. He just couldn't believe the level of science that was being used to prosecute people. And Jerry and I worked together on a number of cases. He used to send me cases. He wasn't all that crazy about traveling, being that he was old and frail, but he always worked for free. He's a great guy, and he will be sorely missed. If you'd like to learn about the Willingham case in Texas, a guy that was wrongly executed, this is a great movie. It's called Incendiary. You can get it from iTunes, and it's definitely worth watching. And if you really want to learn about fire investigation, there's my book, a little plug for my book. It was the first fire investigation textbook in full color. It came out in '06, and the second edition came out in 2012. So, thank you for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Takes alcohol and uses that as an accelerant. Are there any markers for that?
Not unless it gets put out real early, because the alcohol dissolves in water. The thing about alcohol, though, is it doesn't burn very hot, doesn't last very long. So unless he gets a couch or a chair or something stuffed with foam lit, the fire might go out. It makes a terrible accelerant. But you can't detect it afterwards. Or if you do detect it, you don't know whether you're detecting accelerant or whether you're detecting combustion products, because alcohol is produced when you burn wood, one of the products.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
If somebody is a fire investigator, don't they ask their credentials before they allow them to testify?
They do. Now, the question is, don't people get asked about their credentials before they're allowed to testify? And they talk about all of the courses that they've been to for training. And some of those courses may be good, some of them may be not so good. The trouble with training is that unless you have the education to understand what's going on, the training just kind of becomes this rote thing that you learned from a mentor. There's also certification, where people send in applications and fill out forms and actually take a test after they pass a background check. And these people can become certified by one of two organizations. Unfortunately, neither certification program distinguishes between the competent and the incompetent. And I've met lots of people with certifications that can't tell you what the basic units of energy are. And they say, well, I can look that up for you. And, I want to say to them, we didn't ask you that because we were curious about what the basic units of energy are. We know that. We want to know if you know it. And he said, well, I can look it up for you. And they just want to smack them. I'm just embarrassed sometimes by some of the people that share my profession. And those people are my natural prey, but their natural prey is innocent citizens. And it's terrible what happens to people when they're falsely accused. Sorry.
Since you've written the book, are you participating in training of law enforcement? And if so, why isn't this message getting heard?
Because there's so many of them out there. And I do training for law enforcement all the time. But some of these people, I'll do a course on basic energy. And I say, all right, the basic units of energy are joules. But that doesn't include time. If you want to include the rate of energy, then that's watts. And then you want to include the density, and that's watts per square centimeter or kilowatts per square meter. And these guys, some of them have a really hard time grasping this. They became firemen or policemen because they didn't want to go to college. They didn't want to learn science. They hated school. And trust me, I love firemen. If the alarm goes off, I am out of here. Firemen are coming into a burning building. They're heroes. But there's a huge difference in the skill set required to extinguish a fire and the skill set required to understand what happened.
As I understand it, there's no federal law of arson. It's always a state law crime. Are there significant differences among the states as to how they analyze arson and prosecute?
No, not really. There's a National Fire Academy. People eventually go there, or a lot of people in the public sector go there and get their training. It's gotten way, way better than it used to be. They used to teach all of the mythology about crazed glass. They used to tell people crazed glass happens when glass is rapidly heated. Well, I tested that in the laboratory. It doesn't work. You cannot make glass craze except by getting it hot and then spraying water on it. But there's books, including a book written by the National Bureau of Standards in 1980 that says that indicates rapid heating. The literature in fire investigation is toxic, largely because of that. Remember I said they talked about a series of experiments should be conducted to put fire investigation on a more solid footing. They said that in 1977, and in 1980, the National Bureau of Standards, the single most respected engineering and scientific body on the planet, proceeded to print all of those myths. And everybody that wrote a book for the next 10 years quoted those myths because the National Bureau of Standards said it was true. I quoted them. I mean, how could the National Bureau of Standards be wrong? There were 3 scientists that wrote the book, actually 2 scientists and a librarian, and they took the word of 2 instructors from the National Fire Academy who filled them full of all this bad science, and they didn't check it out. And so we've got this toxic literature out there.
Are defense lawyers getting smarter?
They are. When they call me up, more than half of the time they got a guilty client. And I said, my job is to help you avoid being ineffective. And they say, thank you very much. That's what I need. So I get them to buy the book, I train them. I tell them the questions to ask. And we do all right sometimes. Sir? Yes and yes. After the 2009 report from the National Academy of Sciences, the Justice Department put out requests for proposals for grants, and there has been some excellent work done at that ATF laboratory, although not done by ATF agents. Back in 2001, after the World Trade Center, the ATF used to be under the Treasury Department, and they got moved under the Justice Department. And that beautiful research facility became a glorified crime laboratory. But there are private contractors out there. They get the grants and permission to work in that laboratory, and they do some great work. It's just that it takes a long time. And there is a refereed journal, one called Fire Technology, that does a lot of work on fires and fire investigation. And there's a couple of very good conferences that take place. But these are the people that have the PhDs in fire protection engineering. These are the people that have the PhDs in chemistry, or at least a bachelor's degree in chemistry, that are doing the work. The guys that didn't go to college, they're not paying attention. So they read trade journals. And the trade journals are getting better. Everything is way better than it was 25 years ago. But it's still not good, and there's still a lot of people out there that the only word for them is hack. They're out there. Now, one of the reasons it's getting better is, as the great Max Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time. And a lot of these hacks are, they're retiring. And so we get new people in the business. And, for example, I have been a thorn in the side of the profession, since the early 1990s. Well, people that have joined since, have come into the profession since the 90s, they always know, well, this guy is going to review your work. So try and do a good job. People do the same thing in chemical analysis. Yes?
Would you speak about some of the cases that you worked on?
Pardon?
Would you speak about some of the cases that you have been involved with?
Oh, I've been involved in a lot of them. I was in the Willingham case out of Texas. I was giving a presentation at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences back in 2004, and I kind of called out Barry Scheck from the Innocence Project. I said, great job, guys, but with DNA, the answers are in the back of the book. I mean, you can prove that this guy really is innocent, and in many cases, you can prove that it was somebody else. I said, me? I got nothing. I got to start and just say, well, it was an accident. And the courts will look at that, and they said, no. So it was very, very difficult. At any rate, Barry heard about my little speech. He called me up, and he said, we want to work on arson. It turns out the Innocence Project, they get hundreds of letters every month from people that are incarcerated that say they're wrongly in prison. After the rapes and the murders, the most common letter they got was arson. And so Barry asked me if I would look at this particular case in Texas, actually two cases. Both guys are convicted on very similar evidence. Low burning. Remember we talked about how the floor is not supposed to burn unless it has help. Well, these guys were convicted in the late 80s, early 90s. And the fire marshals said, oh yeah, it had to be a set fire. So I persuaded Barry that I was not going to do it myself. And he said, okay, get some friends. I got a lawyer and three other fire scientists, and we reviewed everything. We reviewed all the photos, we reviewed the video, and most importantly, we reviewed all of the testimony. And that movie, Incendiary, is about the Willingham case. And we wrote a report which ended up being the basis of the Innocence Project complaint to the Texas Forensic Science Commission, which had been newly created. And there was a lot of backstabbing going on there. The Texas Forensic Science Commission said, well, we want to get our own person to look at this. And so they hired a guy named Craig Byler, who has 2 bachelors, 2 masters, and a PhD. Really qualified guy. He thinks and speaks in whole paragraphs. And he looked at it, and our report had said that these guys got it wrong because they were badly trained. And really not their fault. Craig just took them apart. And he said their methodology is more like psychics and mystics than like scientists. And he was scheduled to give that report to the Texas Forensic Science Commission in October of 2009. And 3 days before he was scheduled to go there, Governor Perry fired 3 members of the Forensic Science Commission, including the chairman. And it was likened to the Saturday Night Massacre, and most people here remember that. And all kinds of stuff happened. Unfortunately, the death penalty, or the anti-death penalty crowd, they hijacked my case. I wanted to, the investigation to be about bad science in fire investigation. And they wanted it to be about the death penalty. And so it got very political. It's still in a paper. In fact, just today, the Washington Post reported that the prosecutor in that case is, facing potential disciplinary action from the Texas bar because he coerced a jailhouse snitch into testifying against Cameron Todd Willingham. So I've been at least knee deep in a lot of the high-profile cases that have happened in the last 10 years or so.
I noticed in the event write-up that you've given evidence in Canada, and I'm a Canadian. I'm just wondering if there are any significant differences between the 2 countries in terms of the investigation processes, the prosecution of someone charged with arson. Have you noticed anything?
It's pretty much the same as it is here. I've given training to the Ontario fire marshals and the Saskatchewan fire marshals. The main difference in Canada, the term witness stand, where you see people sitting down on the witness stand? In Canada, you stand. And after a few hours, it can be tiring. I know.
So we all have a understanding of common sources for accidental fires, candles and kerosene lanterns and cigarettes and stoves. But what are some of the accidental causes of structure fires that people like ourselves are just not aware of?
Oh, you're probably aware of most of them. Cooking and heating are the biggest ones for lighting structures on fire. The biggest cause of civilian fire death is cigarettes. Lighting chairs on fire, lighting beds on fire. Space heaters. A lot of times people will, particularly in the South, they have these floor furnaces. They'll cover them up in the wintertime and forget about them. They come on automatically. There's space heaters that you can't turn off that live in the wall, and you can only turn them down. And so when it gets cold, if you've moved a chair in front of it, boom. Electronics, coffee makers used to be a big thing. There was about a 10-year period where I was looking at a coffee maker fire every month. Coffee maker manufacturers have finally figured it out. They say, oh, we have a problem. And so they put thermal cutoff devices in there. And then they got a bad batch of thermal cutoff devices. And now they put 2, and they're rated at different temperatures, so you can't get 2 from the same bad batch. So the number of fires is really going down. The number of fire deaths has been cut in half in the last 30 years or so, mainly, I think, because of the prevalence of smoke alarms. That everybody's got one now. Nope, that's a total myth. People do light themselves on fire with cigarettes, and if you're in a chair, like a reclining chair, you can cook like in a grill. The fat will render out. It's forensic science. It's like that, And the fat drips down and then burns up, and you can come into a home after one of these events, and you'll find somebody burned to death in a chair, and nothing else is wrong. And that's where this spontaneous human combustion came about. And a lot of people thought it was alcohol because people that light themselves on fire are frequently drunk when they do that. and people thought it was alcohol, but there is no truth to it. Yes, sir.
That fella beat me to the punch there on that question, but I have one other question, maybe two other questions. How many legal fire cases, if you will, are settled out of court as opposed to actually going to trial?
Oh, most of them. Most of them don't go to trial. In the criminal arena, 90% of all cases are pled out. A lot of times it's not for a good reason. The prosecutor will overcharge a person and say, look, you can plead and you'll get 2 years, but if you make me go to trial, you could be looking at life. Prosecutors have way, way too much power. In the civil arena, there are depositions, and we exchange views before the trial, and so that lawyers can pretty much predict what's going to happen at the trial, and they'll come to some sort of reasonable settlement, unless they're real jerks, and then they'll go to trial. And just to give you an idea of how the civil justice system works, I was working for Cale Yarborough, the race car driver. His dealership, his car dealership burned down, and this is, probably 35 years ago. I was very green in the business, and we were at an evidentiary hearing, and this retired or emeritus federal judge was hearing the case, and he says, have there been any attempts at settlement? And plaintiff's counsel said, well, Judge, we've made several demands, but we've had no reply. And the judge thinks for a minute, and he says, well, apparently the case has yet to reach the end of its billing life. And that's the way it works. And the light went off in my head. And now, if I'm working for a plaintiff, I say, well, look, we're not going to settle this year. You got to let defense counsel bill 50 grand, and then we can settle it.
One other comment. One other accidental cause of fires is, and rather insidious, is spontaneous heating. Have you run into that?
Quite a bit. In fact, I've done a lot of experiments on spontaneous heating. It's kind of magical because there's no ignition source. Linseed oil is the poster child for it. If you get 5 T-shirts worth of linseed oil in a pile and you leave them there and the ambient temperature is above 70 degrees, it will pretty reproducibly go. And I actually did a paper on that at the American Academy one year on testing ignition scenarios in spontaneous combustion. I called it watching paint dry. It is awfully slow. It can take, it used to be the conventional wisdom that if it didn't happen in 8 hours, it wasn't going to happen. And then I did a test where it took 88 hours before the rags went nuclear. And so to do those kind of experiments, what you want is a time-lapse camera and a sprinkler so that you don't have to watch it, and then if it does catch fire, the sprinkler will put it out. You don't have to be there. Oh yeah, all the time. I did a lot of work for Maytag. Oh, I'm sorry. Have I run into spontaneous heating from cooking oil? There's a lot of restaurants got tired of paying the laundry to do their aprons and cloths and napkins, and they decided they would do it themselves. So they get their own washing machine and dryer, and because they were cheap to begin with, they didn't use enough soap to get all the oil out, and when they take these cloth materials, aprons or whatever, and put them in the dryer would heat them up, and you won't start the fire until the dryer stops because you got so much air going through there that you can't get the heat build up. But once the dryer stops, then the thing will go nuclear on you. So I went all over the country for Maytag Corporation looking at alleged defective dryers. And I could take the rags out of the dryer and sometimes extract the oil from them. It happens in restaurants. It happens in health spas because people use body oils. Those will also undergo spontaneous ignition. And those are a lot of fun to investigate.
I have a question. I'm a local firefighter for 14 years. I have a master's degree, certifications. What is your opinion that I need to do to take it if I'm interested in becoming an investigator? What do I need to do to get it right?
Well, you've taken the first step already by getting an education, and you have that experience in understanding fire. Continue to train. Light things on fire. That's the most useful thing that I've ever done is light stuff on fire. And you know, I gotta confess that most fire investigators are probably pyromaniacs at heart. And you know, we would light a building on fire, and you know, we'd be videotaping it. Somebody invariably says, "It's a beautiful thing." But I would do that. Read, keep up with what's happening in fire technology. I'm sure you have a copy of 921. You sound like you're on your way. I can recommend some companies that you might want to talk to.
You mentioned money earlier, talking about the attorneys. What is the insurance industry's position over the decades on this low degree of competence among people that are involved in these weighty issues regarding liability?
It depends on the company. It depends on the company. I fired a lot of companies along the way, or they fired me, because I wouldn't say what they wanted to say, what they thought. There are some insurance companies that hire the cheapest guy out there, or they hire the guy that they've been using for a long time. It's all very personal, and there's people in these companies, there are now bulk companies that do fire investigations for the insurance industry. And they hire former public sector people to be private sector people and bill the insurance company $150 an hour. And you know, if you charge too much, the insurance company will find somebody else, which is how I managed to lose most of my insurance business. I've tried. I get overworked. I get too many cases, so I've tried raising my rates. Sometimes that actually backfires. People say, "Oh, he must be really good at, you know, if he can command $300 an hour." So. If you consider the number of miles, millions of miles of wire, and the number of billions of electrical connections there are around us, it's amazing that we don't have more fires. The electrical industry has figured it out. You know, the National Electrical Code has got a lot of really good provisions in it. Most building departments won't let you wire your own house. So the major cause of electrical fires is a loose connection. A loose connection. Wires don't just go bad. They don't, and when they get overloaded, the breaker opens. So it's a loose connection. You can have the plug not being in tight. It'll get hot. You can have a loose connection at the point where the wire goes to the receptacle. But it's all about loose connections. It can happen in your service panel. There was one brand of service panel that was just, it would look like it was getting ready to crack when you were tightening down on the entrance cable. And so the installers wouldn't tighten it down enough, and then that would catch fire. And I'd find a lot of fires, you know, just with the service panel right at the base. It's pretty easy in some cases. But electricity causes way fewer fires than you might expect. On the other hand, it's kind of magic, and it's very easy for a fireman or a fire captain to just write electrical and be done with it and not actually get it right.
How about lightning?
Lightning causes fires?
Yes.
Yeah.
But, well, for instance, we have a big field, and I asked a couple people to come and say, what causes trees to be charred on one side?
Lightning. No, I was lightning. There's a new kind of danger from lightning. There's this product called corrugated stainless steel tubing that's used in homes instead of the hard gas pipe when you have a gas system. And if that gets hit by lightning, it might make a little hole in it, and you'll have a gas fire. There's a fair bit of work being done on that right now to try and make it more lightning resistant.
Jay, thank you so much again
Okay.
for joining us this evening. Can we give Jay a hand one more time? And thank you all for joining us. Wine and cheese are outside.
Oh, anybody who wants to email me or, ask questions, feel free. I answer most of my emails.
What's your rate?